The Roman Republic, once a beacon of order, governance, and civic pride, began its slow descent into disarray long before the formal end of the Republic. The seeds of its collapse were sown through a combination of internal strife, social upheaval, and the growing ambitions of its leaders. While the Roman Republic had been resilient in the face of external threats, it was the internal discord and the slow erosion of its political institutions that led to its eventual downfall. In the early days of the Republic, Rome prided itself on a system that balanced the power between different branches of government. The Senate, made up of Rome's aristocratic elite, wielded considerable influence, while the popular assemblies provided a voice for the common citizens. The consuls, elected annually, were expected to act in the best interest of the state. However, this system began to strain as the demands of empire grew, and the Republic's political structure struggled to adapt. The growing divide between the patricians and plebeians, the upper and lower classes of Roman society, was a source of constant tension. As Rome expanded its territories, the wealth from these conquests disproportionately benefited the elite. The common citizens, particularly the rural farmers, found themselves marginalized. Many had been conscripted to serve in campaigns far from home, and upon returning they often discovered their lands had been seized by wealthy aristocrats. These displaced farmers were forced to move to the cities, especially Rome itself, where they struggled to find work and were reliant on public handouts to survive. This growing economic disparity contributed to social unrest. The rise of large estates, known as latifundia, worked by enslaved laborers, further displaced the free Roman citizenry. While the elites grew richer, the backbone of the Republic, the small landowning citizen, was eroding. This shift in the social order created a fertile ground for demagogues and populist leaders to rise by appealing to the grievances of the lower classes. One of the first signs of the Republic's unraveling came with the rise of the Gracchi brothers, Tiberius and Gaius. These two tribunes sought to address the growing inequality by enacting land reforms that would redistribute land to the poor. Tiberius Gracchus, in particular, challenged the authority of the Senate by bypassing traditional channels and appealing directly to the popular assemblies. His efforts, however, were met with fierce opposition from the Senate, which viewed him as a threat to their power and wealth. Tiberius was ultimately killed, along with many of his supporters, in what was one of the earliest examples of political violence in the Republic. The fate of the Gracchi brothers revealed the growing tension between the Senate and the popular assemblies, and more importantly, the willingness of the elites to use violence to maintain their dominance. It was a chilling precedent that would be repeated in the years to come. Gaius Gracchus, Tiberius's younger brother, also sought to enact reforms, but he too faced violent opposition. His eventual death marked a turning point, illustrating that political reform within the structures of the Republic had become nearly impossible. In the decades that followed, the Republic became increasingly divided along class lines, with the populares, leaders who appealed to the common people, and the optimates, those who supported the traditional power of the Senate, locked in a bitter struggle for control. This division was exacerbated by the ambitions of individual leaders, who saw the Republic not as a system to be preserved, but as a stage for their personal advancement. One of the most prominent figures to emerge during this time was Gaius Marius, a military leader who broke the mold of Roman politics by appealing directly to the masses. He reformed the Roman legions, allowing men without property to enlist, and in doing so created a professional army loyal more to its commanders than to the Republic itself. This was a significant shift. Where once the Roman army had been composed of land-owning citizens with a personal stake in the well-being of the state, it was now filled with soldiers whose livelihoods depended on the fortunes of their commanders. Marius's reforms, while initially successful, set a dangerous precedent. Future leaders would follow in his footsteps, using the loyalty of their troops to achieve political power. One such leader was Lucius Cornelius Sulla, who would eventually march his legions on Rome itself, a shocking breach of Roman tradition. Sulla's actions demonstrated just how fragile the Republic's institutions had become. In his quest for power, he declared himself dictator, not for the traditional 6-month period, but indefinitely. During his time in power, Sulla initiated a reign of terror, using proscriptions, lists of enemies of the state, to eliminate his rivals and seize their property. The next major figure to capitalize on this chaos was Julius Caesar, a brilliant general and politician who understood the importance of popular support. Like Marius before him, Caesar garnered the loyalty of his troops and used his military successes to fuel his political ambitions. His conquest of Gaul made him immensely popular among the Roman people, but also alarmed the Senate, who feared his growing power. Caesar's crossing of the Rubicon in 49 BCE, a deliberate act of defiance against the Senate, marked the point of no return for the Republic. By leading his army into Italy, Caesar effectively declared that he no longer recognized the authority of the Senate. This act plunged Rome into a period of intense internal strife, with Caesar emerging victorious. However, Caesar's victory did not bring the peace or reform many had hoped for. Instead, his growing power made him a target for those who still believed in the Republic. In 44 BCE, Caesar was assassinated by a group of senators who feared that he intended to declare himself king. The assassination, rather than restoring the Republic, plunged Rome into further turmoil. The Senate had hoped to save the Republic, but instead, their actions led to its final disintegration. In the power vacuum that followed Caesar's death, two of his most prominent allies, Mark Antony and Octavian, later Augustus, vied for control. Although they initially formed an uneasy alliance, it soon became clear that only one of them would emerge as Rome's ultimate ruler. The culmination of this struggle came at the Battle of Actium in 31 BCE, where Octavian decisively defeated Antony and his ally, Cleopatra. With Antony's defeat, Octavian stood unchallenged as the ruler of Rome. Yet, while Octavian would later be celebrated as the first Roman emperor, his rise to power signaled the end of the Roman Republic. The institutions that had once governed Rome were now mere formalities. Octavian, taking the title of Augustus, established a system that preserved the outward appearance of the Republic, but concentrated all real power in his hands. The Senate continued to meet, but it was now little more than a ceremonial body. The collapse of the Roman Republic was not the result of a single event, but rather the cumulative effect of decades of political instability, social inequality, and the ambitions of individual leaders. The Republic had been designed to govern a city-state, but it had grown into a vast empire, and its institutions had failed to adapt to the changing realities of Roman life. The constant internal strife, the erosion of the traditional values that had once underpinned Roman society, and the rise of personal armies all contributed to the Republic's demise. In the end, the Roman people, weary of the endless political chaos, were willing to accept the rule of a single leader who promised stability. The ideals of the Republic, shared governance, civic responsibility, and the rule of law, had given way to autocracy. Augustus may have brought peace, but it was a peace that came at the cost of the Republic itself. The system of checks and balances that had once defined Roman governance was gone, replaced by the rule of emperors who would govern Rome for centuries to come. The story of the Roman Republic's collapse is a cautionary tale of how a society that fails to address its internal divisions and inequalities can slowly tear itself apart. What had once been a vibrant, dynamic political system became paralyzed by its inability to adaptability. One of the primary issues was the increasing concentration of wealth and land in the hands of a few elite families. As Rome conquered new territories, vast tracts of land were seized by wealthy patricians and equestrians, leaving the common citizens with little to no land of their own. This led to the rise of a class of landless poor, many of whom found themselves struggling to survive in the urban centers of Rome. These individuals were often reliant on the wealthy for employment or food, creating a dependent and increasingly discontented urban population. As the wealthy consolidated their power, the gap between rich and poor widened, and the traditional Roman values of shared civic responsibility began to erode.